My name is Sophia Marilyn. I am 30 years old. And last Friday night in New York City finally broke me. Growing up, my birthdays were ignored while my brother received lavish catered events. For 3 decades, I was treated like an invisible ghost in my own family. When I arrived at the upscale restaurant, my parents did not even look at me. They were busy holding a surprise birthday cake for my brother's golden retriever, telling me to go sit at the back table. I did not scream or cry. I calmly walked up to their table and dropped a stack of 20 childhood diaries, all bookmarked to my tear-stained birthdays. Before I tell you what was written inside that made my mother collapse in tears, tell me your age in the comments if you have ever been the black sheep, and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a moment of quiet justice. I work as a compliance analyst for a logistics firm in Manhattan. My job is to look at ledgers and find the discrepancies people try to hide. I trace resources. I measure deficits. But for 30 years, I refused to audit my own family. My parents Helen and Richard are not villains. They are just parents who made a choice a long time ago about which child needed them more. Connor is 33 now. When he was in his early 20s, he hit a depressive wall so hard he dropped out of law school and moved back into my parents' basement. He barely survived that year. My parents spent the next decade treating him like fragile glass. Every milestone of his was celebrated as a triumph of survival. Every request he made was treated as a medical necessity. I became the utility child, the one who did not require a fuss. I paid my own way through college working weekend shifts at a hotel front desk. When I got my first promotion, my mother sent a text with a single thumbs up emoji because she was busy organizing a welcome back party for Connor returning from a wellness retreat. I told myself it was fine. 6 months ago, the silence got expensive. Connor adopted a golden retriever named Buster to help with his anxiety. I love dogs. I do not love getting a panicked phone call from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon because Buster swallowed a tennis ball and needed emergency surgery. Connor did not have the credit limit for the operation. My parents had just paid for his apartment deposit. So my mother called me. Her voice had that specific thin edge she used when Connor was in crisis. She said Connor would spiral if he lost this dog. She said family steps up. I drained my savings account. $4,000 paid over the phone directly to the veterinary clinic. That money was supposed to be my deposit for a better apartment closer to my office. I stayed in my cramped building with the leaky radiator and told myself I was doing the right thing. Connor sent me a text thanking me. My mother said I was a lifesaver. Then they went back to forgetting I existed. Last Wednesday, my phone vibrated on my desk. It was a call from my mother. She asked what I was doing on Friday night. I looked at the calendar. Friday was October 12th, my 30th birthday. I felt a sudden tightening in my chest, a dangerous kind of hope. My mother told me to meet them at an upscale patio restaurant in the West Village at 7. She said to wear something nice. She said the whole family would be there. I hung up the phone and stared at the compliance reports on my monitor. For the first time in my life, I thought they had finally noticed me. I thought the $4,000, the years of quiet support, the endless stepping aside had finally earned me a seat at their table. I booked a blowout at a salon near my office. I bought a dark green dress that cost more than I usually spend in a month. I planned to bring my heavy work tote bag to the dinner because I had a therapy appointment the next morning. My therapist had asked me to bring my childhood diaries so we could trace the origins of my chronic need to please people. I packed 20 of them. Faded notebooks with bent wire spirals and cheap cardboard covers. I had no idea I was packing the exact weapon I would use to dismantle my family. The evening air in the West Village carried a chill that made people walk faster. I walked slowly. I let the fabric of the dark green dress brush against my calves. The leather straps of my work tote dug into my shoulder. 20 diaries weigh more than you think. Paper gets heavy when it holds decades of silence. I gave my name to the hostess at the front desk. She checked her screen, gave a polite nod, and led me through the dining room toward the heated patio. String lights hung from wooden trellises. Heat lamps hummed in the corners. I heard my mother laughing before I saw the table. It was a prime spot near the brick wall. Richard sat with his back to the heat lamp, studying a wine list. Connor sat next to him, wearing a casual sweater that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Beside Connor was his fiancée, Claire. She was adjusting the collar on Buster. The golden retriever panted happily, his tail thumping against the wrought iron chair legs. Helen hovered over all of them. She was arranging small wrapped boxes on the table. I stopped 5 feet away. I waited for one of them to look up. I waited for the smile, the recognition, the moment where the utility child finally gets invited to the celebration. Helen turned. She did not say hello. She did not say happy birthday. She looked at my dark green dress, frowned slightly at the formality, and pointed to a narrow metal chair wedged at the very end of the table near the waiter station. "Sophia Good, you are here," Helen said. Her voice carried the brisk efficiency of a project manager assigning a task. "Put your bag down and come hold Buster. He keeps trying to eat the napkins." I walked to the metal chair. I set the heavy tote bag on the ground. I looked at the center of the table. The small wrapped boxes were not jewelry or gift cards. They were gourmet dog treats. From a bakery box, Helen produced a round cake covered in gray liver frosting. It had a single candle shaped like the number 3. She pulled a miniature cardboard party hat from her purse and snapped the elastic band under Buster's chin. "We need to get the lighting right before they serve the appetizers," Helen instructed. "Claire, lean in next to Connor. Sophia, pull the leash tight so Buster faces the camera. Do not let him turn his head." I stood there. I wrapped the leather leash around my wrist. The leather felt rough against my skin. I looked at the liver cake. I looked at the candle. I looked at the mother who had given birth to me exactly 30 years ago on this very day. I ran the numbers in my head. I do this when the data does not make sense. I verify the inputs. I paid $4,000 to save this dog. I gave up my apartment deposit. I wore a dress I bought to celebrate my own existence. The output was a metal chair and a leash. "Mom," I said. My voice was level. I kept it in the register I use for compliance meetings. "It is October 12th. Helen was holding her phone up, tapping the screen to focus the lens. "I know what day it is, Sophia. It is Buster's big day. Look at the camera." She did not hear the subtext. She did not catch the meaning. In her mind, my existence was so thoroughly decoupled from my birth date that the calendar meant nothing. I tightened my grip on the leash. The dog pulled against the collar, whining for the cake. The sound of silverware clinking at nearby tables felt too loud. "I meant the date," I said, speaking slightly slower. "Today is October 12th. It is my birthday." The shutter sound on Helen's phone clicked. She lowered the device. The air around our table went still. Richard finally looked up from the wine list. He did not speak. He just watched the table, the way a bystander watches a car skid on ice. Claire took a sip of her drink and looked away. Connor blinked. He looked at me, then at the liver cake, then back at me. His brow furrowed. The confusion on his face was genuine. He had not planned a cruel joke. He had not orchestrated a scheme to put me in my place. He just stared at the extinguished candle, completely lost. The realization hit me harder than intentional cruelty ever could. Malice requires effort. Malice means you are worth the energy it takes to hurt you. Neglect requires nothing. To them, I was the background scenery in a play about Connor's survival. "Oh man," Connor said. His voice dropped. "Sophia, I forgot. I am sorry." Helen reacted before the apology could land. Her protective instincts flared. She perceived Connor's guilt as a threat to his mental stability. In Helen's world, any discomfort Connor felt was a precursor to a depressive spiral. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. Then she turned to me. Her eyes narrowed. She leaned across the table. Her voice dropped into a sharp, tight whisper designed to scold, without drawing the attention of the surrounding diners. "Why would you do that right now?" Helen hissed. "You know he has a lot on his plate. You are deliberately making him feel bad on a night we planned for him to relax." I looked at my mother. I looked at the lines around her mouth. I audited the moment. I had stated a biological fact. I was born 30 years ago today. In response, I was being charged with emotional sabotage. "I just wanted to sit down and have dinner," I said. "I wanted to be acknowledged." Helen shook her head. Her face hardened into a mask of righteous defense. She deployed the weapon she had used against me since I was a teenager. The phrase that kept me paying the bills, fixing the problems, and staying out of the way. "You are the strong one, Sophia," Helen said. The words were delivered like a sentence. "You do not need a fuss. He needs this. Why do you always have to make things difficult when we are just trying to have a nice evening?" I looked at Richard. My father had spent his entire life avoiding conflict by blending into the upholstery. He folded his menu and placed it flat on the table. He refused to meet my gaze. His silence was an endorsement of Helen's narrative. Claire shifted in her seat, suddenly very interested in the condensation on her glass. The waitress approached our table carrying a tray of water glasses, sensed the invisible tripwire we were all standing on, and quietly pivoted away. I felt the cold air hit the back of my neck. I felt the fabric of my expensive green dress suddenly feel like a foolish costume. I had dressed up for a part that was not written into this script. My mother was right about one thing. I was strong, but she fundamentally misunderstood what that strength was built on. She thought it was built on a limitless capacity to absorb their neglect. It was actually built on the sheer necessity of self-preservation. And self-preservation meant recognizing when an investment was permanently bankrupt. "You are the strong one." For years I thought that phrase was a compliment. I thought it was a badge of honor. Acknowledgement of my competence. Standing on that patio holding a dog leash while liver frosting melted under a heat lamp, the translation finally clarified. "You are the strong one" meant you are the one we do not have to care for. It meant your pain is an inconvenience. It meant my bank account was a resource, but my heart was a liability. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the leash. I unspooled the leather strap from my wrist and let it drop to the stone patio. Buster immediately lunged forward and buried his snout in the gray frosting. Claire gasped. Connor tried to pull the dog back. The cake slid across the white linen tablecloth, leaving a smear of grease and dog saliva. Helen stepped back. "Sophia, look what you did." I looked at the mess. I looked at the metal chair near the waiter station. I looked down at the canvas tote bag resting against my ankle. The bag held 20 spiral notebooks. It held the ink from a 12-year-old girl crying alone in her room. It held the calculations of a teenager realizing she would have to fund her own life. It held the silence of a woman waiting for a message that never arrived. The bag felt heavy, but my hands felt incredibly light. I reached down and picked up the canvas handles. I unzipped the top. I did not care about the stares from the adjacent tables. I did not care about the heat lamps, or the string lights, or the crisp autumn air. I was done auditing their ledgers. It was time to show them the math. I reached into the heavy canvas tote bag, resting against my ankle. The leather handles fell away. I felt the familiar worn edges of cardboard and wire bindings. I did not scream. Screaming is what people do when they want to be heard, but lack the evidence to command a room. I had the evidence. I pulled out the first stack of spiral notebooks. I placed them on the white linen tablecloth right next to the smear of gray liver frosting, pushing aside a basket of bread to make room. I reached back into the bag. I pulled out the second stack, then the third. 20 diaries in total. The small table was suddenly overwhelmed, the towering stacks of cardboard and wire bindings dwarfing the wine glasses and the ruined dog cake. The table fell silent. The surrounding patio noise seemed to fade into a dull hum. The soft jazz playing through the outdoor speakers became background static. The heavy breathing of the dog, eating the ruined cake, was the only immediate sound. No one at our table spoke. Helen stared at the notebooks. Her hands rested flat on her lap. Connor shifted his weight. The fabric of his expensive sweater rustled. I arranged the books methodically, in chronological order. I work in compliance. We rely on chronological sequencing to establish a pattern of behavior. I aligned the spines so they formed a neat edge against the table setting. The bottom book was a faded blue composition notebook from 2002. The top book was a black moleskin I had finished last month. Every single one contained a bookmark. Small yellow sticky notes protruding from the pages. I picked up a pink journal with a frayed cover. The year 2008 was written across the front in faded black marker. I was 12 years old then. I opened it to the page marked with the yellow tab. The paper was thin and aged. The handwriting was round and looping. The ink was pale blue. October 12th, I read aloud. My voice was steady. It was the exact tone I use when presenting an audit finding to a board of directors. No heat. Just data. I waited in my room until 11 o'clock. I left the door open so Mom would see I was awake when she walked by. She did not come in to say goodnight. I went out to the hallway and heard her on the phone in the kitchen. She was arguing with a travel agent about Connor's weekend trip. I went back to bed. I turned off the lamp. I guess turning 12 is not a big deal when you are 12. Helen stopped breathing. I watched her chest freeze. The defensive posture she had held a moment ago began to crack. Her eyes darted to the pink notebook, then to my face. She opened her mouth, but the automatic dismissal she usually relied upon failed to materialize. The truth is difficult to dismiss when it is written in the handwriting of a child. I set the pink journal down. I picked up a green spiral notebook. The year 2012. I was 16. I found the yellow tab. October 12th. I passed my driving test today. I drove myself home. Dad's car was not in the driveway. Mom left a note on the counter. It said there was cold pasta in the fridge, and they were at the therapist office with Connor. I ate the pasta standing up at the sink. I bought myself a cupcake from the bakery down the street. The cashier said happy birthday. She was the only one. Richard pushed his chair back. The metal legs scraped harshly against the stone patio. It was an ugly, sharp sound. He placed his palms on the table. His knuckles were white. Sophia, stop this, Richard demanded. His voice lacked its usual passive tone. It was thick with a sudden rising panic. This is an ambush. If you are going to sit here and try to embarrass your mother, we are leaving. I observed my father. For decades, his entire survival strategy consisted of enabling Helen's focus on Connor, so he would not have to deal with the messy reality of parenting, either of us. My audit was threatening the very foundation of his comfortable silence. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I tapped the green notebook. You are welcome to leave, I stated. But the exit is through the main dining room. You will have to walk past 40 people while your daughter reads the historical record of your absence. Or you can sit down and listen to the audit. Richard glanced at the main dining room. He noticed the waitress hovering near the service station. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His hands were shaking. He pulled his napkin into his lap and stared at his water glass. The resistance crumbled, because cowards always prefer a private reckoning to a public scene. I reached for a thick leather-bound journal. 2017. I was 21. October 12th, I continued. I worked a double shift at the hotel. My feet are covered in blisters. I checked my phone on my break. 0 missed calls. 0 text messages. I called home at 9. Mom answered. She sounded exhausted. She said Connor was having a bad week, and the medication was making him sleep all day. She said she could not talk. She hung up before I could say hello. I poured myself a cup of cheap coffee in the break room and pretended it was a toast. Claire sat frozen. She fixed her gaze on her fiancé. Connor was staring at the stack of diaries like they were explosive devices. The narrative he had been fed his entire life was that our parents were simply supportive. He had never been forced to examine the cost of that support. He had never been asked to look at the invoice. The realization that his safety net was woven from my erasure was visibly dismantling him. His breathing grew shallow. He rubbed his hands over his face. He was facing the very real consequence of his sheltered existence. I picked up a slim gray notebook. 2021. I was 25. I opened it to the yellow tab. The handwriting was no longer round. It was sharp, quick, efficient. The handwriting of a woman who had learned to stop asking for things. October 12th. I received an email from Mom. The subject line was urgent. I opened it hoping for a birthday wish. The body of the email contained a link to a holistic treatment center in Vermont. She asked me to wire $500 to cover Connor's travel expenses. I sent the wire at noon. I did not get a thank you. I went to the pharmacy and bought my own birthday card. I signed it myself. I closed the gray notebook. I aligned it perfectly with the others. The stack of 20 diaries sat between us like a monument to their failure. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not a heated argument. It was not an emotional appeal. It was a documented ledger of decades of neglect. The heat lamp buzzed. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive wine drifted from a nearby table. My heart beat steadily in my chest. I felt no anger. The anger had burned away years ago, leaving only this cold, precise clarity. I looked at Helen. Her rigid posture had collapsed. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands covered her mouth. The delusion she had maintained for 30 years was shattered. She could not claim she did her best. The data proved otherwise. The entries were not dramatic tales of abuse. They were quiet, devastating records of a ghost haunting her own childhood home. For 30 years, they had relied on my silence to maintain their comfort. They had assumed my competence meant I did not require care. They had confused my resilience with a lack of needs. Sitting at that table, viewing the 20 notebooks filled with the evidence of their absence, I saw the exact moment they realized the deficit could never be repaid. The account was permanently overdrawn. I ran my fingers over the edge of the notebooks. In my line of work, we look for patterns of systemic failure. When a company ignores a small leak, it eventually compromises the entire structure. My family was a compromised structure. Every time I wired money, every time I accepted a text message in place of a presence, I had subsidized their negligence. I had funded my own exclusion. Connor reached out. His hand trembled as his fingers hovered over the stack of journals. He did not touch them. He pulled his hand back and pressed it flat against the table. I watched him process the weight of what I had just read. He was not a villain. He was a man who had been kept in a protective bubble, constructed from the raw materials of my childhood. He was finally seeing the bricks. I did not need them to validate my pain anymore. I did not need them to offer a retroactive apology for the birthdays they missed. An apology is just words. Words can be manipulated. Words can be twisted to serve a defensive narrative. But ink on paper written by a child who just wanted her mother to open her bedroom door cannot be debated. It stands on its own. I observed the liver cake resting near the edge of the table. Buster had licked the frosting clean off one side. The candle, shaped like the number 3, had fallen over and lay extinguished on the white linen. It was a perfect summary of my entire existence within this family dynamic. An extravagant celebration for a pet placed directly next to the documented history of my erasure. I sat back in my narrow metal chair. I folded my hands in my lap. I had delivered the audit. There was nothing left to debate. Helen broke first. She dropped her face into her palms. A ragged, uneven breath escaped her lungs. It was a hollow noise. The sound of a woman who spent her entire adult life running from a reality that finally caught up to her. She wept silently. The tears fell onto her lap. She did not reach out to me. She did not offer a miraculous apology. Reality does not supply miraculous apologies. She just cried. She wept for the daughter she erased. She wept for the impossible choices she made to keep her son alive. The cognitive dissonance shattered like glass hitting a concrete floor. I watched her shoulders shake. The outdoor heat lamp hummed above us. The wind rustled the fabric of the patio umbrellas. Those were the only sounds at our table. Connor stared at the white linen tablecloth. His chest rose and fell in slow, heavy movements. He looked at the stack of faded notebooks. He looked at the ruined gray liver cake. The golden retriever panted quietly by his feet. The realization washed over him. His survival was funded by my absence. His safety net was woven from the threads of my neglected childhood. He swallowed hard. He squeezed his eyes shut. He did not beg for forgiveness. The weight of the moment stripped him of the ability to form a defense. I sat in the metal chair and observed them. I did not feel the urge to comfort my mother. I did not feel the need to reassure my brother. The desire to fix their discomfort was the defining feature of my existence. That desire was gone. The ledger was closed. I unclasped my purse. I pulled out a $20 bill. I placed the crisp green paper on the table next to my untouched water glass. I smoothed the edges of the currency. I stood up. I left the 20 childhood diaries sitting next to the dog cake. The heavy canvas tote bag was empty and light. I slung the leather straps over my shoulder. I turned my back on the table. I walked across the stone patio. The route to the exit required movement from the lower sunken dining area up towards the street. I walked from bottom to top, going up the narrow brick stairs. My heels clicked against the masonry. Each step upward carried me further away from the ecosystem of their delusion. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cold October wind hit my face. A police siren wailed in the distance. The hum of New York City traffic surrounded me. I breathed in the exhaust and the crisp autumn air. It felt like oxygen. The next morning I began the severance. I opened my phone. I navigated to my contacts list. I selected the profile for my mother. I blocked the number. I selected the profile for my father. I blocked the number. I did the same for Connor. I logged into my banking portal. I identified the saved payment routing for the veterinary clinic. I deleted the authorization. The mouse clicked softly in my quiet apartment. The digital separation took less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes to dismantle a lifetime of financial and emotional obligation. The cost of establishing a boundary is total. It is devastating in its finality. The movies try to sell us a narrative of dramatic reconciliation. They promise that standing your ground will force your abusers to respect you. That is a comforting fiction. The reality is much colder. They did not show up at my door with revelations. They did not mail a letter of profound understanding. They retreated into their comfortable dynamic. I became the villain in their story, so they could continue to survive. I accepted that role. I wore it willingly. Walking away did not fix my family. Walking away fixed me. The isolation was the price of my autonomy. It was a steep invoice, but I paid it gladly. For the first time in my life, there were no sudden demands for money. There were no passive-aggressive text messages. There was no anxiety humming in the back of my mind, waiting for the next disaster. The deficit was finally gone. A year passed. I moved into a better apartment closer to my office. The new building had secure windows and quiet neighbors. I decorated the space with dark wood and green plants. I created a sanctuary. On the evening of my 31st birthday, I put on a tailored black dress. I booked a table at a quiet restaurant in my new neighborhood. The dining room was softly lit with flickering candles. The soft murmur of other diners provided a gentle background rhythm. I ordered a glass of sparkling water. I ordered a steak. I ate slowly. I savored the flavor of the food. I signaled the waiter. I purchased my own slice of chocolate cake. It arrived on a white porcelain plate. A single flame burned in the center. I did not make a wish. Wishes are for people who hope the universe will intervene. I intervened for myself. I paid the bill. I walked out of the restaurant and onto the quiet street. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement. I paused on the corner. I adjusted my posture. I was standing upright, facing the camera, looking directly forward. The ledger was perfectly balanced,